So I'm going to record this class so that we could also have it available on YouTube. So, guys, yesterday we had a discussion about uh, why do we need to protect trade, right? We talked about that there is a reason like infancy argument when your industries are new. There's a reason such as dumping, which is an illegal sort of thing that can happen to your country if somebody is selling below the cost of production. So you may want to sort of protect your trade. And the third thing we saw was also sometimes you want to improve your balance of payment, and also sometimes you want to protect jobs, and that's why you are trying to make sure that you are protecting trade. Now the question is, how do we protect trade? Okay, so what are the ways that we can protect trade? And there are many ways we could protect trade that we need to discuss, and it is a very commonly tested topic as well. Before I move on to talk about it, I want to ask you guys if there is any questions you guys have. Any questions? So, so what are we going to discuss today is basically when you are looking at, when you're looking at the economies out there, sometimes they're importing, sometimes they are exporting. So when they're importing versus when they're exporting, this is something we need to understand, how the international trade diagram work. So first, if you look at how international trade diagram works, I want to draw a case of, and I want everyone to draw it with me. So if you have your notes, and if you have your pencils or rulers or whatever, bring it out, because we're going to draw a diagram now, and this chapter is all about diagrams, so we need to draw and understand a lot of concepts. So I'm going to draw a case where a country is what we call an exporter versus an importer. So if you're a country, you could be also an exporter. Okay, when are you an exporter versus when are you an importer? And guys, you got to stop me when you have a question or you don't understand a concept. In fact, let's just start off with with the easier case of us being an importer. Okay, when does a country import? So let's say this is Pakistan, and let's say Pakistan is right now a producer of, for example, cell phones. Okay, so Pakistan does produce cell phones. For example, I don't think it produces it, but let's say Pakistan produces cell phone, and this is the demand and supply of cell phones of for Pakistan. And let's say currently the domestic price is P naught, and the quantity that Pakistan produces domestically is Q naught. Okay, but what if I tell you guys this, that the world price of cell phones is much lower than P naught? Okay, in fact, in the world, China is making it for the rest of the world for a price like PW. So the world price is lower than the domestic price, and therefore this blue line we call is what we call is of the world supply. तो आपका जो वर्ल्ड सप्लाई का जो कर्व है वो अभी PW है, राइट? अब इसका मतलब क्या होगा? परफेक्टली, दिस इज अ परफेक्टली इलास्टिक सप्लाई कर्व. Perfectly elastic supply curve के क्या मायने होते हैं? What does perfectly elastic supply curve means? Perfectly elastic supply curve means that a producer can produce any quantity at this price. Okay, China can make infinite amount of the cell phone at this PW price because China has huge production capacity or capability. If this is the case, if China has that kind of capability of making such, then PW price पे वो कुछ भी कुछ किसी country की भी demand को आराम से meet कर सकता है. So they can meet the demand for any country at this PW price. Do you guys get that? Does that make sense, guys? So this is the world price, and that's why this is world supply curve, which is perfectly elastic, which means Pakistan will be like, you know what? If the world price is so low, domestic consumers will say कि we will want to buy only, we will want to buy Q2 amount of imports. Why do they want to buy Q2 amount of imports? Because अगर imports पूरी allow होंगी, if imports are allowed in this country, then PW price पे This is the how much of the demand is being met at PW price. Okay, but at this PW price, if this is what the demand is out there, how many domestic consumers are able to meet this demand? And the answer is only these many domestic consumers are able to meet this demand. Why? Because this is the supply curve which is being met by PW. The rest of the supply curve of P naught minus PW, these guys are those who are unable to meet the supply curve. So Zainab, this Q2 is what we call domestic demand, and this Q1 is what we call your domestic supply. And the difference between domestic demand and supply, can anyone tell me what is the difference between the domestic demand and supply will be? Anyone who can tell me what the difference between domestic demand and supply will be? Anyone who can write that? Or let me tell you guys, the difference between domestic demand and supply will be the level of imports. Did you guys get that? Are we good? Let me explain this diagram one more time. This is an important thing to understand. Any question before we move on? You can write your questions, guys. I'm reading. You can keep on writing whenever you have a question, no matter how, whatever it is. Just write that question so that it's easy for me to keep on reading and go back to the concept. So, हमने कहा, what we said was this is demand and supply for example, cell phones. Pakistan, when they make cell phones on their own, the price is P naught. But internationally, China can make phones cheaper, so China is making it PW. And if import is allowed, then domestic consumers will be like, you know what, we want to buy at this PW price. We want to buy this much of cell phones. Okay, but this PW price can be matched by some domestic consumers as well. And how many domestic consumers? This A to B are those domestic consumers who are able to meet this demand. Are you guys with me? So A to B are those domestic producers who are able to meet this PW price. B to, for example, this, let's call it E. B to E are those producers who are unable to match PW price because their cost is much more. So if A to B are those consumers who are able to meet the domestic demand, because remember, supply curve is also your marginal cost curve, or the cost of making one extra unit, right? So every producer between 0 to Q1 are those domestic producers who are able to meet PW price. So they will be able to sell at PW price. And then this Q2 minus Q1 will be the level of imports. So in other words, what I'm trying to say, and I want you guys to draw this diagram as well, is that if the world price is lower than domestic price, then a country imports. You're an importer because the world price is lower than the domestic price. Do we guys get that? So consumer कौन सी price pay करेंगे? The consumers will be paying PW price. Why? Because let's say in Pakistan the cell phone is for $500, but the Chinese cell phone is for, let's say, $300. So Pakistanis are very happily paying $300, and that $300 Q2 will be sold, of which Q1 are those people who are able to sell it at 300. Q1 domestic supply. So Q1 is domestic supply. Q2 is so let me write this. So Q2 minus Q1 is your level of import, of which Q2 is domestic demand, DD is domestic demand, Q1 is domestic supply, DS is domestic supply, and therefore Q2 minus Q1 is your level of import. So we get this. Does that make sense, guys? Are we good to move on? Do we get this concept? So I'm saying this, that only those producers who are able to match this price are the ones who are able to sell. Is that okay? Any questions before we move on? Guys, the next thing that I want to talk about is the idea that so if the world price is lower than domestic price, then you are of course an importer. But what if your world price, what if world price is such that you are world price is um, world price is more than domestic price? What if you are looking at a case of export? So I want to focus on the case of export. I'm going to focus here now. Let's make the diagram of when do you become an exporter. So guys, if this is the case, let's say this is Pakistan again, and let's say Pakistan is very good at producing wheat. Yeah, cotton le lete. Pakistan is very good at producing cotton, for example. Okay, and let's say Pakistan price is P naught. Okay, and this is Q naught. Okay, if Pakistan price is P naught, but what if the world is has producers who provide at PW? So let's say this is world supply. The world is supplying it for, let's say, $30, and Pakistan makes it for $15. Now what should Pakistani producers do? Pakistani producers will be like, you know what, I will sell my cotton at PW price. So they will basically now supply Q2. Why will they supply Q2? Because they'll be like, you know what, let me sell in international market as well, and let me sell all the way like Q2 at international market. So Q2 becomes my domestic supply. Why? Because he's now selling all his goods at $30. Now domestic market को वो कितने में बेचेगा? And the answer is he will also sell the same good in the domestic market for now, not at 15, but at Q1. So domestic demand will be now Q1. And the reason why he's selling it now at a higher price, he'll be like, yeah, if the world is giving me $30, so Pakistan should also give me $30 because I can pura ka pura मैं export कर देता हूँ otherwise. So what he will say, he'll say, I'm gonna meet at Q2 all the at $30. All that I can supply is basically this much, and this means now for him the price is not P naught, because he'll be like, you know what, if the world is paying me $30, पाकिस्तान में बेचने का क्या फायदा? What's the point of selling at 15? I'm just going to sell it at 30, and I'm going to sell it to the whole world, including Pakistan, at 30. So I'm going to sell Q2 at $30. But domestic consumers, these A to B, these A to B consumers are still able to pay 30. But this B to C consumers will be basically unable to buy. Why? Because now the price has gone to $30, which means this B to E, this B to E becomes my level of exports. So what is happening here? Let me explain this diagram one more time. If the world price is more than the domestic price, then you become an exporter. Why? Because you want to sell it to anyone who's willing to pay you extra price. So you are selling, the best price you're getting is $30, and assuming this is free trade, guys. So assuming they're free trade, they will sell everyone at $30, and that's where they will be selling Q2 amount, and therefore Q2 minus Q1 becomes my level of exports, because Q level of exports of the Q2 that you make from 0 to Q2, guys, from 0 to Q2, Q1 will be bought by domestic consumers, and the rest will be bought by importers. Now, Sidra is asking me, why can't they sell at $15? They have an advantage. I mean, if you can sell it at 30, why would you want to sell at 15? When you can sell it for the lowest possible price that people are selling it for is 30, then you will sell it for 30. You won't sell it for 15. A good example of this is that, in Pakistan, we make very high quality mangoes, and a lot of our mangoes get exported at a very high price, and whatever are left behind are those which are not that high quality, which domestic consumers eat. A lot of high quality mangoes get exported for a very high price, and the low quality mangoes or the decent quality mangoes are left behind, those which are not worth exporting, or those which will not give you a higher price. All the high quality thing which can give you $30 will go, and you will sell that for 30, and whoever is going to buy domestically will buy that. So in other words, the story here is that if the world price if the world price is more than domestic price, then a country becomes an exporter. Do you guys get that? Does that make sense? Are we good? So this is an important thing. Abhi tak maine, by the way, uh, we haven't discussed tariffs and quotas, because of the fact that first we need to understand this. What is A to B? Sidra, who asked me what is A to B? Sidra is asking. Sidra, A to B are those people who are able, domestic consumers, those consumers who are able to match $30. आपके पास, you might have some very rich Pakistani consumers who are able to match $30 for cotton. Those who are able to buy $30 are those domestic consumers. Q1 are those domestic consumers who are able to pay $30. And B2C are those domestic consumers who are unable to pay $30 and therefore they are not buying it. B2E are basically your sales that is happening from international markets. So you're exporting B2E. Is that fine? Am I good to move on? Because from now on, we will now look at, we'll go back to this diagram, which is this import diagram. Okay. Uh, let's move on to this diagram. But before I move on, I want to ask you guys if there is anything that you want to understand, any questions. Recording. Okay, now guys, I want to talk about a situation of tariffs. So I'm on page number 51 of our notes. When you're looking at notes, 51 is what it is. So let's say government says that, what, let me go back to the diagram first. Let's say government says that they're unhappy with this level of import. They feel that this level of import is too much. Okay, what if they feel this level of import is too much? How can they control this level of import? Okay, so that's one thing they want to sort of quickly address this question. So if they have a level of imports which is Q2 minus Q1, and they want to sort of reduce this level of import, what can they do? Okay, so what if the government is unhappy and they decide to put a tariff on this kind of import? Just a minute. I think I've somehow lost my. Hi guys, sorry, there's some issue somewhere. But is this working now? Are we good to move on? Sorry. So now let's say the government says that, we want to sort of reduce this amount of imports. So they decide to put a tariff. What is a tariff? A tariff is a tax on imports. Okay, so let's make a diagram, guys, where we try to sort of see how it looks like, how the tariff looks like. Okay, so the government is trying to put a tariff, and they're trying to put a tariff because they want to sort of reduce the amount of imports that is happening out there. Can you guys all see the screen? So when you put a tariff, the tariff may look like this. Can we draw this together, guys? It'll be easier. So let's make demand and supply first. Okay, and let's say this is demand and supply of cell phones in the market that are coming. Okay, because it's a tariff tax on import, let's assume right now the world price is PW. World price is, for example, $300. Okay, and at this world price, Q2 minus Q1 is being imported. So this is my world supply. Okay, and domestic price for that matter is, for example, $350. Okay, is there any question about this diagram? Why are we importing, by the way? We're importing because the world price is lower than the domestic price. So we're importing how much? Q2 minus Q1. So level of import is Q2 minus Q1. Q2 is the domestic demand because $300 per, this is what domestic demand is. At $300, this is what domestic supply is. So Q2 is your domestic demand. Q1 is your domestic supply. And Q2 minus Q1 is your level of imports. Are you all with me? Any questions, guys? Um, any questions? If there's no question, I can move on. Now, the government decides to put a, a, a tariff now. Okay. Uh, if everyone is hearing things properly and everything, just tell me, am I good to move on? Because I'm a little worried. Nobody's answering anything. Okay, great. So the government decides to put a tariff. Government ne kaha, let's just put a tariff like this. They put a tariff or tax on this of $15. So they put a tariff of $15. Let me write this tariff T is equal to $15. Okay. So when you put a tariff, now this will become world supply plus tariff. So you put a tariff of $15. So this becomes PW plus T, which means $315. So I added $15 to the price. So they put a tax of $15, which would mean now the good becomes expensive. It's not 300 anymore. It's 315, which means now your Q3 minus Q, or rather, let's call it Q4 minus Q3 will be the level of imports. A couple of things have happened, guys, which is something which we need to understand. When you put a tariff, first thing first, when you put a tariff, you made the good, which was for $300, to become 315. What did that do? Number one, if you take it this line all the way here, this point here, let's call it X. X is now the new domestic demand because you made it expensive, which means Q2 minus Q4 consumers are unable to buy this good. So Q4 will be my domestic demand and Q3 will be my domestic supply. Why is my domestic supply going up? Well, why? Because now when you make the price 315, more domestic producers are able to match this price. So at 315, more domestic producers are able to match this price, which means Q4, which means Q4 minus Q3 will now be your level of imports. So what did you do? Your level of imports previously was Q2 minus Q1. Now when you make the price go up, your level of imports has gone down from Q2 minus Q1 to Q4 minus Q3, which means you've reduced the level of, when you put a tax on imports, you've reduced the level of imports from Q2 minus Q1 to Q4 minus Q3. Do you guys get that? Does that make sense? Is there any question before I move on? Anyone who has a question about this? Does that make sense? So what did we do from tariff? We have reduced, let me write this. we have reduced the total imports. And what also we did was this, that domestic demand demand went down from Q2 to Q4. Domestic supply went up from Q1 to Q3, and level of imports fell from Q2 minus Q1 to Q4 minus Q3. Does that make sense, guys? This is what I'm saying. These are the things that I'm saying. Any questions? Any questions? Because this is the concept that I want to cover today. I will go back to this diagram later as well, but I want to quickly, for the next 4 minutes, 5 minutes, I want to take questions quickly about anything that doesn't make sense in this diagram. Anyone? Uzair is saying Q3 one more time. Uzair, basically हो ये रहा है कि when you are making the price to go to 315, now the world price has gone from पहले 300 था. When you put a tariff, you make it 315. Only previously, only these many domestic producers, Q1 were the domestic producers who were able to match 300 price. Now Q3 producers are able to match. More domestic producers become competitive when you put a tariff. More domestic producers like Q3 are the domestic producers who are becoming competitive at this price. So the fact that when you put a tariff, you are basically making the more domestic producers to become competitive to be able to sell at this price. Does that make sense, guys? We have reduced.
Yeah, it's enough. Hi.
Yes, I actually wrote it in the wrong video. Can you guys do me a favor? Whenever you write me a message, please do not write me a private message. Please write a public message. Please, because when you are writing me a public message, then I will. When I write back to it, then I'm not looking at it. So I'm saying that we have reduced the total imports. Domestic demand went down from Q2 from Q2 to Q4.
Where is it?
So domestic demand went down from Q2 to Q4. Domestic supply went up from Q1 to Q3. And the level of imports has fallen from Q2 minus Q1. This is the level of imports to Q4 minus Q3. Makes sense? So I'm saying the level of imports has gone down from Q2 minus Q1 to Q4 minus Q3. Hamza, your question is saying how will, when you put a tax, you're putting not a tax on domestic producers, you're putting a tax on importers. When you put a tax, it decreases supply of foreigners and therefore increases supply of domestic producers. So that's what we're saying. When you put a tariff, more domestic producers are able to sell the good now, because now the price, pehle price 300 they were not able to match it. Now the price is 315, they're able to match it. More domestic producers are becoming competitive. Does that make sense? Any questions? Any questions, guys? Okay, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to end this class, and then tomorrow we'll recap this. Tomorrow, by the way, we're meeting from 9 to 10, and I want to finish this topic. So don't want to do revision. I want to finish this topic from 9 to 10. Tomorrow, I'm going to meet and discuss this. I'm going to record this class as well for anyone who misses out, so you will get a chance to see this as well. Okay. So tomorrow from 9 to 10, we're going to have a class. We're going to recap this. Okay. Why people still buy the domestic product even if it's at a high price? Those who are able to buy it are able to buy it. The idea goes is that domestic, we are assuming domestic product is as good as foreign product, it's just that it's expensive. So if for example at 300 there are some domestic consumers who are producers who are able to sell domestically at 300 as well. So whoever is competitive at 300, 0 to Q1 were competitive at 300, were able to sell it. But then when the price becomes 300, more people became competitive. These Q3 minus Q1 are those people who are becoming competitive because the price is now better. Does that make sense? So you need to remember that. Tomorrow I'm going to recap this diagram, guys. I'm going to end the class right now. So tomorrow is Friday. There is no class on Friday, but tomorrow class will be from 9 to 10. It's an extra class where we'll cover tariffs and quotas and all that. From 9 to 10 tomorrow, we will be meeting for an extra class covering the topic that we are doing right now. Those people who are unable to attend can find the recording of that class also, but I will encourage everyone to come and attend this class. Okay. So